Now, for anybody that was out at the weekend, or anybody that was even on the streets of this country over the weekend, you would have seen all sorts of people out there. There's people having parties in Scotland. There's people visiting the beaches of the southern England. There's people in the parks of London. And all over the country, more and more people, when the weather is good, come out. The weather has taken a bit of a turn for the worse, but basically the lockdown, I think, is beginning to move, not just because Boris Johnson says that we might have to look into moving into phase 2, but because people are just getting to the point where they're thinking, well, the more people that go out, the more people that should go out. Let's talk to Claire Fox, former Brexit Party MEP, founder of the Institute of Ideas as well. Claire, a very good morning to you.
Good morning.
Thank you very much for joining us on the Independent Republic. Fascinating piece, I thought you wrote in The Spectator about what it is that we are doing, what we've been asked to do, and why we shouldn't feel too sort of virtuous about it.
Yeah, I think, I want to remain slightly agnostic as to whether the lockdown, people have sort of started to divide into for or against the lockdown.
Yeah.
I accept that lockdown was brought in, best intentions, but what has really been irritating me are attempts to make out it's a virtuous act,
yeah,
and that in fact this is the equivalent of, going out and joining the resistance in the Second World War or something.
Yes. No, I'm actually very much with you on that, because I'm similarly inclined. I know that we have to do it. I think it was the right thing to do, but I also think now it's time to talk about coming out of it.
And also people making a virtue of it, saying, oh, isn't it wonderful? We've got this lockdown. We can do Zoom yoga. We rediscover our inner selves. Time to read the novels. And first of all, it's a particular lifestyle that would encourage you to think that never seeing anybody and being stuck at home is a positive thing. So I think we should cut out the kind of overemphasis on how brilliant it is. Even though we all want to see a silver lining, I think that makes it something that it isn't, which is it's basically demobilised us. And more worrying, I think, because I'm interested in free speech, is anyone now who questions the lockdown or says that we should be planning to get out of it is immediately attacked for, putting lives at risk, risking the elderly. And that, it's not a physical lockdown. It's not an intellectual lockdown. We're not supposed to not think.
Right.
And I think it's important that we retain our appetite for life.
Yes, I think you're right. But isn't it rather middle class as well? It's all these middle class people who are walking around going, oh, isn't it great, I can now do my yoga. I mean, most people who are working class people are still getting on the Jubilee line, as far as I can see, every morning, because they can't work from home, because they do manual jobs, and they want to be out there if they can be.
It made me laugh. When the lockdown started, quite a lot of commentators were saying, who are all these people on the tube? And when I pointed out they were people going to work,
yes,
it was as though there was an imagination veil. It hadn't dawned on them that most work is not sitting behind a computer. You can't zoom in and then if you're a plumber, you know what I mean? So obviously a lot of work is physical labour. A lot of people have had to carry on working. And people who are being stopped from working are actually having the most creative aspect of their personality drive to them. We don't celebrate unemployment. When you're without a job, stuck at home, you don't think, oh, wonderful, how creative for you. And I made the point in the article that for women, for example, for a long, hard struggle to get out of the home as the only place that you could express yourself, because actually it's confining and it makes you maybe smaller and have a more obsessive internal view of the world.
Yes, well, it sort of almost encourages the old curtain twitching, doesn't it, where people are looking outside to see what everybody else is doing and then complaining about it.
Yeah, somebody made the point that on their street that somebody's taken to wearing a yellow, one of those visor jackets, a clipboard, and walking up and down.
Well, like the warden from Dad's Army. Yeah, put that light out.
She actually hasn't got a job, but she wanted, and in a way that's an instinct, isn't it? Because people do want to feel that they're helping. I think that it doesn't help that we're told that the only way that you can help is to do nothing.
Yes.
I just think it makes a virtue of the wrong thing. I also think they've missed an opportunity. I mean, okay, I accept the lockdown, but there's, many young, healthy people who could have been maybe mobilised, the third workers, who could have been mobilised on very specific projects to get them active. If you can say to people, we want NHS volunteers, why can't we have volunteers who will help with infrastructure or building? Or, there are other things, but somehow they've made it seem as though the only thing that you can do to save lives is sit at home. And I think it's just demoralising.
Yes.
And it's not good for a society that's actually going to need a huge amount of energy to go and kickstart the UK to work again.
No. And
Because we're gonna
also,
have to
when the
make a
weather's
big
good,
effort.
I mean, like this weekend,
Yeah.
when the weather's good, everybody's out anyway. So, I mean, the idea that when people complain, like I talk to Peter Hitchens from time to time, and he complains about this kind of, impingement on our liberty. I'm like, well, it doesn't look like that to me, to be honest. I mean, I know some people are having to stay at home, but there's an awful lot of people going out.
I mean, I've got friends in Spain and in Italy and in Poland, and let me tell you, this is a very light lockdown
Yes.
in comparison with there. So I appreciate that, by the way. I appreciate that the government gave us judgment and allowed us to interpret this, and I don't think we've made fun of it. I think everybody takes social distancing seriously. I mean, effectively, people might be going out, but it is not the same. You're not able to socially interact in the same way. So you might go on a longer walk than you'd ever have dreamt of doing. You might even go and sit on a park bench, which, of course, is almost like crime of the century these days.
Well,
And
exactly
I
right.
think
But you said you're quite
that
right as well.
inability to be moderate, to just be generous with people,
Yeah. And also, it's the free will, isn't it, that you miss, basically, because we are a country which is used to basically allowing you to do whatever you want to do, more or less, unless you start to get into the real nitty-gritty of free speech, which we haven't got time for today. But as you said, it's sort of sensible, for example, to fix roads at the moment when there's nobody on them. But I don't know if that's happening. I see an awful lot of empty, sort of orange fencing going along bits of roads in London, and there's nobody working there.
I know, and that's what's so ironic about it, because actually those jobs could have been seen as essential jobs.
Yeah.
I mean, when life is normal, you at a weekend you can't get a train because there's works on the line.
Yeah, right.
Well, it might not have been possible to have imagined that this would be a good time when trains are not running to actually do some repair work. And also, we've all focused on old people homes and all the rest of it. Wouldn't it be brilliant if you'd have got that volunteer army to go in, I don't know, plant lots of flowers or paint the outsides, or things that would not have infringed the health or risked anyone.
Yes.
But somehow in their efforts to really overemphasise it, stay home, save lives, they've effectively told people your activity is irrelevant and you should stop doing things. And I just think that you can lose the habit of being an active person, and people are just screaming at the walls.
Yeah.
I mean, alone the fact... Sorry,
I was going to say, I have some sympathy with the government doing what they did, because I think if they hadn't done it, people's instincts would have been just to do whatever they would do normally. And I think, in a funny sort of way, Nicola Sturgeon summed it up quite well a few weeks back, where she said, if your life is carrying on as normal, you're not doing it right.
Yeah.
Because almost, if they said to everybody, look, the beaches are going to be open now, what would happen? Everybody would go to the beach. It wouldn't be done sensibly,
Yeah, I think that there will be a time and a reckoning as to how we should have dealt with this, and there will be all sorts of arguments about whether it was necessary. But I tend to agree with you. I understand symbolically the lockdown meant something, and actually people more or less kept to it. All I think now is that there is a danger of turning that into a kind of... There are cultural consequences to this. That's the point I'm making.
Yes.
And if you overemphasise and you start saying, clap yourself because you've done nothing for 3 weeks, 4 weeks, 5 weeks, and if you then demonise anyone who slightly strays from a very prescriptive way of behaving, you're going to get into a situation where when you then want to mobilise people to go back to work, they will be so consumed with fear and ambivalence about what it is that you're meant to be doing that we won't be able to get people. I mean, there's already examples where when people have said when you can now return to work, that people are frightened to do so.
Yes.
So I think that mixture of fear and the demobilising people and telling them to shut up and put up with it and celebrate it and all the rest of it can have some serious consequences moving forward.
Yeah.
And I just think it's time to at least free people up from that. And I'm actually quite glad to see a bit of initiative, people using common sense and saying, well, I might have a picnic with the family. I'm going to not necessarily interpret this in the strictest possible way.
Yes, and just sit far enough apart so that that's still part of. And because I think we have to think about. People talk about people who die with coronavirus rather than of it, and I think we need to talk about the economy that way, where we say, look, this is going to be around for a while, so we have to think about, rather than hiding away from it, how we can work around it, how we can live around it while it's there, without feeling as though we can't do anything anymore.
I know, and also, you've got to think that most people who celebrate the lockdown sometimes don't understand that for millions of people, they're sitting at home and they're absolutely consumed with panic about the fact that they might not have a job, that their business is going under, that the guy that they work for who's got a small business is not going to survive. And if, in fact, you could be thinking through, well, look, how can we make this work with social distancing? I'm not one of the people who's saying, go out and defy it. I think it's a waste of time. I'm not of that ilk. I do think, though, that we should be planning now exactly how we're going to restart society. And I think being told we're not going to discuss it, all of these things actually has the impact that we're just not going to be planned for. We should now be working out how we're going to make the economy boom again, which sounds the most unlikely thing after this massive hit. But why shouldn't we be thinking that?
No, listen, I've been saying that from the beginning, because everyone who says to me, this is going to be disastrous, it's going to be terrible, it's going to be the worst crash of all time. Well, partly because of that, the government is basically sort of duty-bound to save it. So the government actually can really boost the economy with all the money that they're going to put into it. And quite frankly, the high street may end up being better off than it was this time last year.
Yeah, but if they had a conversation with us, if they started to encourage people to plan like that, even if you were saying, look, stay at home, but what you should be doing now is working out how you're going to make the business work, and get people to just think in a future-orientated way. I think it's that sense of stultifying numbness that you get from just being told, no, you've got to sit still and not do anything, that actually I think is what will cause more damage. There is a danger, of course, that you can fatalistically accept that the economy won't work. If you've so demobilised and made people feel fearful and so unable to act in this crisis, then how are you going to get them to really energetically take on what's going to be the greatest challenge? I mean, for me, the big challenge of this virus is how we respond once we're out of lockdown. Will we have the energy and the enthusiasm and the guts and the courage to go back to work and say, right, we're going to now really make things happen in an extraordinary, let's make something positive out of it, and that you've just said.
Yeah, exactly. Because there are going to be areas, I was talking to a friend of mine in Scotland the other day, up in Scotland, for example, particularly not so much Glasgow and Edinburgh because they've got quite vibrant local economies, but outside of Scotland's major cities, it's all about tourism. And if you've got nobody coming to visit Scotland, to go to the castles, to go and visit the lochs and to tour around, do a bit of fishing and all of that, I mean, that's the whole economy as far as that's shot to pieces.
Yeah, I mean, there's going to be major sections of the economy that are going to need, to say, an additional boost is the understatement of the year.
Right.
But I think that one of the good things that we've seen is so many companies with an eagerness to repurpose, turning gin factories into, hand sanitizers and so on. I think you can see that people have got the creativity and the wherewithal to actually do something different if they're encouraged to. But what's not going to happen is if you are in a situation where you sort of say, we're in lockdown and now you've got to go back and make everything work again, I can't see how that's going to happen, which is why, I mean, there's a lot of discussion, why didn't they plan this, why didn't they plan that? And there's some seeming fear that they have, that if they don't just send these one-dimensional messages to us, stay home, stay safe, all the rest of it, that we're all going to run around like lunatics and risk lives and all the rest of it. I think it would be much better to try and start a mobilised, planned return, and to actually say to some companies, look, can you repurpose now that maybe tourism's not going to be in? What can you usefully do as a company that we can help you with? If the government are going to give money, then why don't they creatively intervene in that way? That's just the sort of thing I'm trying to get people to think about, at least.
Yes, I think that's brilliant. Well, Claire, we must get you on again. Thank you so much for joining us, and welcome to the Independent Republican, Mike Graham. Claire Fox, founder of the Institute of Ideas, former Brexit Party MEP. I think Claire's absolutely right. We do need to repurpose the nation. We need to repurpose the economy, and if it means being a little bit more creative and a little bit more adventurous and a little bit more imaginative about how companies employ people and what they actually make and how they operate from one year to another, this is surely the time to do it. Well,